Hey guys, I am Meredith and welcome back to my channel. So I'm in Texas, which means that we don't really have spring here. It jumps pretty much from winter straight to summer. So we are already starting to get into some really hot temperatures, like 90 degrees some days. So I was in desperate need of some summer dresses and some tops. And I went to Joann seeking out that like pre-shirred material where all you do is you just get however much you need and then you sew it together in the back and you have a dress pretty much instantly. But when I went to the store, I couldn't find anything that was pre-shirred. So I was like, you know what? I'm finally gonna learn how to shirr material on my own. It can't possibly be that difficult. So I did some Googling, did a little bit of research. Huge shout out to Annika Victoria, who is a fellow sewing YouTuber. She has an excellent tutorial on her channel for how to do shirring. If it were not for that video, I do not think that I would have been as comfortable tackling this as I was after watching that. So I will link that video for y'all in the description below. It was really excellent. So I watched that and was able to figure out how to make this little dress. So I'm gonna show you guys how I made this. In my research with shirring, it seems like the most important part of the whole thing is what settings you use on your machine. So I'm gonna talk y'all through all the settings and troubleshooting that I did for my machine. So that'll be the very first thing that we do, and then I will get into the tutorial on how to do this top slash dress. So let's go. All right, y'all, so this is the kind of sewing machine that I have. It is a Singer heavy duty. Now, I do want to preface this before I get into the settings that I used. Every single sewing machine will be different as far as how you'll need to do the settings for this. So this is just how I did it, a kind of direction as far as like how to do some troubleshooting, but I would highly recommend practicing before you just dive into it. The biggest things that you're gonna need to do for shirring is first and foremost, you will need to use elastic thread for your bobbin. So this is the thread that I used. It's just a Gutermann elastic thread. You can find it in the thread section at any fabric store. So this is what you use for your bobbin. You will need to hand wind this. So you don't want to, like my machine has an automatic bobbin winder, you don't want to use that because it will make this it will stretch it out too much and then you won't get the shirring that you want. So it needs to be a little bit looser so that it can give you the stretch that you need. So hand winding it is going to be the trick there. So there'll be the elastic thread, that will be one of the most important things. And then for your settings, you will need to adjust the tension and the stitch length. So if you've watched my videos before and I've done gathering before, you know that I really rely on using the highest stitch length and the highest tension. That's just a gathering technique that I use anyway. It's kind of the same thing for shirring. So you would want to use a higher stitch length and a higher tension. Not necessarily wanting to go all the way up to the top immediately. I do use the longest stitch length on mine, so I have 4 settings for my stitch length, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I have it set at a 4 for the length. My tension goes from a 1 to a 9. I have it set on 7 for shirring. The more you go up in the tension, the more tightly everything will be scrunched together. So if you want it to be really densely packed together, you'd want to go up. If you want it a little bit less dense, you would go down. So that's kind of how the settings are going to work for shirring. Another thing that was really important, which I was trying to avoid, if you watch Annika Victoria's tutorial, one of the very last troubleshooting tips that she recommended was adjusting the bobbin tension, which turned out to be exactly what I needed for my machine. Now, in the little bit of research that I did, it seems that machines that have a bobbin like mine, which my bobbin is just right here, and then it pops down into, it just slides down into the bobbin casing right here. Basically, from what I read online, any machine that has a bobbin like this, instead of the ones that go onto the front, you will need to make your tension on your bobbin a little bit tighter or you will not be able to shirr. Now, I can't guarantee that that will be the case with your machine, but if you've gone through all the other troubleshooting tips as far as like adjusting your tension, adjusting the stitch length, rewinding the elastic bobbin, because sometimes it can be too tight or too loose. So there's lots of different variables that can make this work, but if you've done everything you can and it's still not shirring, then you may need to adjust your bobbin tension. But that was a game changer for me. So those are kind of the basic settings for how you'll want to set your machine ahead of time. Again, highly recommend practicing a few rows just to kind of get the hang of it. But once you figure out the exact settings that work for your machine, it's pretty easy. So now that we've figured out our settings, let's go ahead and get into the tutorial. All right, so to make this top, I'm going to be using some leftover lightweight cotton fabric that I have. It's about a ½ yard long and 55 inches wide. So when you're shirring something, the typical rule of thumb is that it should be about 1.5 times the width of whatever you're wanting to cover. So I have a 42-inch bust, so ideally I'd be using a 63-inch wide piece of fabric, but I was able to make this work with the 55-inch wide piece that you see here. For the very first step, you'll want to finish any edges that are going to be near the shirred part of your garment, and this is really important because once the shirring starts to go in, it's going to be really hard to finish those edges later. So to finish the neckline of this top, I'm turning the edge under twice and then sewing it with a straight stitch. Before I actually begin shirring, I'm going to move my needle over to the left as far as possible. So now that I have my needle over as far as it can go here, this is going to be my guide for the lines of the shirring. So I know that if the previous line lines up with this, because the needle is so far over, that will give me pretty much exactly a ½ inch between each row. So that's a really easy way just to make sure that your lines are straight and evenly placed. As you sew the shirring rows, make sure you smooth out the fabric and stretch it out a little bit. If you sew over any bunched up patches, it's going to make the shirring look very messy and it won't stretch as well. Because my fabric is the exact width that I needed, I am just sewing from selvage to selvage, and this just made the whole thing a lot easier to keep track of. And really take your time when you're doing the shirring. Even if you've meticulously gone through and gotten all of your settings exactly right, this elastic thread is just really finicky and can get jammed pretty easily. It also runs out way more quickly than you think, so definitely get more than you think that you're going to need. I used about 3 spools for each of my projects. See, this is what you have to look out for, is that you'll just be sewing along just like normal, thinking everything is going well, and then all of a sudden your machine will jam in some way. So definitely just be patient with this process. It's not as simple and linear as regular sewing is. Once you've sewn enough shirring to suit your needs, I did about 9 inches to end at my natural waist. Go ahead and steam the new shirring that you created, and this is going to shrink up the fabric and give you a real idea of what it will look like after washing. And make sure when you're using the iron that you don't actually make contact, you just want to steam it and not press it flat. After steaming, cut off the bottom of the top to whatever length you prefer, and then you can finish the bottom edge the same way you finish the neckline. Once all the edges are finished, you can go ahead and fold your top in half and pin it together, and then sew the back together with 1 straight stitch, making sure that you're getting all the ends of your little shirred stitches. That's what's going to hold everything in place. Quick tip for you, if you would prefer a dress instead of a top, you can add a little ruffle like I did. To make this ruffle, I just cut out a piece of fabric that was twice the length of the width of the fabric, and then I gathered it up using a basting stitch and then just sewed it on. So that's a little quick option if you would prefer a dress instead of a top. To make some little sleeves for our top, I'm gonna measure out 2 pieces of fabric that are about 18 inches long and 6 inches wide and fold them in half hot dog style with right sides together. Then I'm gonna sew super close to the raw edge with a straight stitch, and then once they are sewn, I can flip them right sides out and iron them. One more tip for you, if you'd prefer a strap that's a little bit wider like this one, you can take the edges and turn them under twice and sew them with a straight stitch as opposed to folding the whole strap in half. That'll give you a little bit more of a wider strap, and it just gives it a nice finished edge here. When pinning and sewing the straps on, make sure that you pull the fabric taut when you're attaching it so that the fabric maintains its stretchiness, and then you will also want to use a zigzag stitch. That also just helps the fabric maintain its stretch when you're wearing it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope that it was educational in some way to you, or at least made you feel a little bit less scared to try and tackle shirring. I know that before this whole process, I was absolutely terrified to try this. I had no clue what to expect, but it really isn't that bad. It's all about just practicing, taking your time, taking it nice and easy. One of the best things about this whole project is that I purchased a little bit over 2 yards of fabric that they were just remnants that were left at Joann's, so I just had to make it work with whatever was left. And I had just enough to make a dress and a top, and I might have enough to make one more top, and I have a little bit more of the elastic thread left. So all in all, it was a little bit less than $30 for all the supplies, and I got a top and a dress out of it, and I still have supplies left over. So all in all, very much worth the time, energy, and money invested into it. I feel like I could not get something that is an equal quality for the same price. So if that is any incentive for you to try this out, I highly recommend it. It's really not as difficult as you think. So go out there, try some things, have some fun. Bye guys.